Good morning, ladies and gents. I'm glad you're here listening to this new series of episodes around suicide and suicide awareness and my Divine Relationship podcast. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful to be here with Sharon Ledworth, who's based in Ireland. And she is a wellness coach now who unfortunately came to this experience of suicide through losing her brother through suicide and her two failed attempts at suicide. Sharon, welcome. Thank you for making time for us today. Would you like to talk a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
So I am a suicide survivor, and 24 years ago, I lost my brother to suicide. And I suppose the emotional impact on me at that time was again so profound because I was left with a guilt. So I was left with a guilt because my brother had asked me to come home on the Friday.
Yeah.
So he passed on the Saturday night into the Sunday morning, and he'd asked me to come home on the Friday night. But I had just started a new job at the time, and I couldn't come home until I was only allowed one weekend a month. And the following, in 2 weeks' time, would have been my 21st birthday. So I wasn't going to come home until my 21st birthday party that weekend.
Wow.
But he had asked me to come home, and I had said I couldn't. And I did speak to him over the phone, but then on Saturday night, he took his life. So for me, I was dealing with the grief, obviously, of losing my brother. I was dealing with the grief of suicide, and suicide grief is so much different than another grief. And it doesn't take away from the grief of anybody else or any other death or grief. It's just a different because there's the unknown.
Right.
There's the guilt to it of could I save them? For me, that is one of the things that happened for me and why I feel that, I went down that road then of, depression because I was holding that guilt of if I had came home, if I'd only came home, I would have saved him. So
Oh, that's so deep because I have the guilt for my cousin. He had managed to get away from people that were making his life difficult. And unfortunately, I mean, I didn't make him go back, but there was the family have this thing about, you can only fix a problem if you face it. And so they were trying to get him to face the problem. And I was due but to come back to the UK. They're from the UK to Spain. And then my last words to the people who were trying to persuade him to go back was, please don't send him back to where the danger is. And my guilt there is that I didn't step in and say to him, get away from it, come with me. I let that process happen. So I can relate a little bit to what you're saying about your brother, that guilt of not being able to fix. I similarly have a guilt. So the guilt is something we can talk a little bit more about and how we can do something about that, because the other guilt I have is a friend called me and I was on a ferry between Spain and the UK. And he was, and I could, this line was so bad. It was so crackly. I couldn't hear. And he was saying, and sometimes I just feel like I can't hold on. And I said, please just hold on until I get home. I'll get home to the UK and I'll call you. And as you do when you're live at home with the family, suddenly everybody wants to talk to you. And it was 27 hours later. I didn't get to talk to him. I intended to call him. And the news came that he'd gone. So I have that guilt. So how do you help people, first of all, deal with that guilt? And how did you deal with your guilt around that? Do you think you've dealt with it?
oh, I definitely have, and it definitely took time. And that's where I think, for me, especially here in Ireland, when people pass by suicide, they say, that you should wait a window of 6 months before you even go to a therapist before, like we have PA house here in Ireland, so they say, 6 months and then you can be assessed by PA house.
Wow.
For me, like that is so long because, yes, we do need time to obviously, kind of, because obviously the shock is so real. We do
Yeah.
need time to process it. But if we're processing something by ourselves and we don't have any awareness and we don't have any understanding of it, then of course we're going to internalize it. We're going to internalize it because again, of the where the amygdala goes, the amygdala, when we have a stress response like that or a trauma, the amygdala goes into survival. So how can I survive? Okay, well, the only way really I'm going to be able to survive is if I try and rationalize it with a mind that is totally having adrenaline and cortisol every day because now I've just lost a huge part of my life that is such a shock. So for me, it is very much where I work from is, whether you're bereaved a couple of weeks or a couple of months, it's about, having that understanding, that awareness straight away. Because even if we look at the statistics of suicide, and how it impacts not just the family, but again, I think it's about, well, the last time anyways, when I was doing the facilitation, it was like 100 and something people it affects from one suicide. So
Wow.
that's your community. So let's say if I take it from my brother. So my brother was into hurling, what's called here. He was
Yeah.
into fishing. He was into snooker. So all of those communities, all those people were affected by my brother's suicide. His school was affected. He's obviously his friendship. So it's not just the main family, it's a knock-on effect. So if the people don't get help or don't have the awareness, I believe, if they don't, and that's just from my own experience, because I went down that route of suicide, my own suicide attempt, because I couldn't cope. I couldn't cope with the constant thoughts of I should have saved him. I should have been home. I should have came home. Looking at my parents, obviously grieving, looking at my siblings, wanting to help all of those because I was a fixer, and not being able to.
Wow.
And I went back to work very, very quickly. But that was my coping mechanism, was to run away, run
Yeah.
away from it all.
Yeah.
Yet I wasn't running anywhere, because it was all running an internal dialogue that, if you did come home, he would be here. So for me, the guilt is real straight away when it
Yes.
comes to suicide, because they might have, and I remember before my brother passed away, like we didn't have any, and this was with no awareness. That You're talking 24 years ago. And then I had to ask, are we any better off in this day and age? And,
Yeah.
like there are services, like we didn't have Pieta House. We didn't have Pieta House when our brother passed away, like, and there are more services there. But these services are up the walls. Like these services are really, really
Exhausted. They're stretched to the limit. Absolutely.
stretched to the limits. So, you might have somebody, who's bereaved through suicide, and then they'll say, okay, well, we'll get you in 6 months. But in 6 months, you get lost. You're just in a pile. And unfortunately, unless you go chasing it, unless you go after it, then that's really the only time we've seen. But as I said earlier, 6 months is a long time to be in your own thoughts. 6 months is a long time not to have any awareness, so not to be around people who can support us. And grief is very, very tough. And I remember when I was doing the facilitation for Hug. So Hug is an organization for people who are bereaved through suicide. Now that's not just for the main family. That is for if you're a friend, if you are, going to
I
school with
love that.
somebody. So they're a great organization, and the facilitators for that have already been bereaved through suicide. So you have to have experienced bereavement through suicide to become a facilitator. So it's really, really impactful. But I remember when I was doing the training for it, and they had a grief coach there, and he said, like, none of us really know what to say when somebody passes through suicide, because everybody's shocked. They were always this happy-go-lucky person. That was my brother. Like, my brother was always smiling. And that is somebody, people would still say 24 years on, they'll still say, oh my God, I always remember Colin. He was so smiley. And even the day that he passed away, like, he went out the door.
Yeah.
We had this kind of sliding door. I was in Dublin, but man, still says that, he went out that door, he was all dressed up in like lovely clothes, and he smiled at her, waved at her and smiled. And you wouldn't have known.
So
You
heartbreaking to remember that vision of him and then trying to match up what actually happened subsequently. That,
absolutely. So
yeah,
you have that
that
vision,
doesn't
and
matter.
then you have the vision of the garden and the priest coming to the door to tell you that your son has passed.
Oh my God.
So, even if we go with conflict between, the logic and the feeling side, the feeling side will always win, because that's the last prominent moment.
Yes.
But we can change those, because when we go in, when we get that shock, or when we get that, that news, and our root chakra switches off, we go into that survival. So coping mechanisms are huge. Some people will go to alcohol, which I did down along the line. Some people will go to drugs. Some people are just, again, might totally just internalize everything. But if we get seen to quite quickly, or if we can, have that awareness, what you're doing now, like you're bringing this awareness that there is help out there, there is support. I don't have to wait for 6 months. I can, contact somebody, you can talk to somebody, because it's huge. And just going back to that point, and I finished off, sorry, that thing about what the grief counselor said. Not everybody's going to know what to do. actually probably nobody's going to know what to say to you.
Yeah.
And we're briefed through suicide. So this guy said, if you don't know what to say to anybody, he said, buy a packet of biscuits, go to the house and eat the packet of biscuits because there really is nothing you can say. Just keep eating the biscuits and just
Or-
be there. Yeah.
I'm sorry to laugh, but it's such an Irish solution.
He's like, just buy a big packet of biscuits, eat the biscuits, and just be there because that's all we can be because there are no words.
Just the presence, just the presence. Oh my
Present.
gosh. And of course, there is a resistance because when the other friend passed, it was trying to reach them and I could not, everything I said was the wrong thing to say, you know. And that moment, I felt like such a failure because I'd failed him and I'd failed the family. But I was trying to reach, and it's so true. Just something, some act of presence is probably a little bit better for some people. But then there's also on the other flip side, because I also at times wanted to, this is in my 30s, I wanted to take my own life. I used to sort of stand on the edge of a platform and the tube station and just go, any minute now, I could just step up. If I just had the courage, I could step off and it would all end. So I wasn't planning it over and over again, but it was the pain that I was feeling was just, I just want the pain to end. And I don't know, I think it's probably angels, it's probably something else that saved me because I came so close so many times when I felt so bereft. But I'm looking back at that time, especially when my cousin took his life, and I thought, what saved me? I couldn't actually put my finger on it, but I think I had friends. I had friends that would have checked up on me at some point. I had friends, but there were days when they would have checked up on me. I just did not want to connect with them because I didn't have the resources within me to be with anybody. So I like the idea of just sitting with them and eating a packet of biscuits. But if somebody had turned up on the door and said, I'm here with a packet of biscuits, I don't know how I would have reacted because there was a part of me that was in so much pain. I couldn't let anybody in.
Yeah.
So that's a question for me. I don't know if you've come across that idea for yourself or others as you've done this
Yeah,
work.
and I think that's where we're coming now to the point in 2025. Even if we look at Pieta House, so Pieta House this year is bringing a big campaign into asking about suicide. So one of the biggest, and it's the biggest myth ever, is that if I ask somebody, are they suicidal, that I'll put that intention into their head.
Oh, God.
So and it's huge for kids, and I see it people who come here to my clinic and they have children because I work with the schools, have people come in from the school and they're like, Sharon, I think they're depressed, and and then it's I think, well, ask the question.
Ah,
Have you thought about suicide? Have you suicidal tendencies? Because and I did a short video on it there a couple of weeks ago because it's the biggest myth. We do not put that into that person's head. If somebody is suicidal, they already have the thoughts. They're already gone down that rabbit hole that they can't come out of. And I don't like to call it a rabbit hole, but I'm down that road. I'm already in that thought process. I'm already, the next step is to go and look to see, what I can do. But there are different steps to it. So, but as I say, what happens when we don't ask the question? So if we do ask the question and they say, yes, I am suicidal, then we can ask, well, have you got a plan? So, and if they say, no, I don't have a plan, say, okay, well, these are the services then that, look, we can go here, we can go together, if you're open to it now that you've opened up, because that is going to be like
ah.
a weight off somebody's shoulders.
Does that happen? Does that happen that you find and meet the person at the right time and they're open to help?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's like what you said. It's about being there as a support. It's about being there as a friend. It's not judgmental, and this is where we have to come away from the stigma of it. It is not judgmental for somebody to ask me, "Am I suicidal?" Now, somebody might go, if they're not,
Ah,
but somebody might go, "Oh, Jesus, no, no, I'm definitely not. I'm definitely not." Which is great again, because as I say to people, that's great again, because then that shows us, okay, well, we don't have to go down this route. But then like they might say, no, I'm not suicidal, but I'm really sad and I don't know why I'm sad.
yes. And children,
Oh,
certainly.
yeah, or even adults. Like, I mean, I have adults that come in, and I even for myself, like even when I think about my suicide attempts, and then I met my husband, and then we had children, and then the next minute, like I had everything. Like, this thing, you're in your life and you've got your kids and you just got married, and but yet you feel empty inside. You know, so that, you know, for me, people come to me and they say that, they say, to everybody else, I have it all, but I've lost a sense of self. I've lost a sense of me. And then I'll ask, you know, are you suicidal? Like, have you thought about suicide? Isn't even, and even in, when we say a nicer way to ask it, but it's a softer way to ask it, like, you know, have you thought about suicide? And they're like, no, I haven't. But then you know what kind of area to bring them down. So again, that would begin. Okay, we could talk about counseling, we could talk about energy work, we could talk about these kind of things, or again, look at the aspects of their life where they really feel that, because you can zone in on that. But when it comes to suicide, and when it comes to that thing of, yes, I am suicidal, that is a weight. That is a complete weight off their shoulders. And
Can
again,
they feel that connection the moment they feel like they're safe enough to connect? I think, yes, that could be a real light coming in.
a real life. But and I do believe that, like, it in that moment, it's like, oh my, somebody's watching. Somebody noticed something in me. Somebody
Yeah.
what they care. And you know, even for my suicide attempts, and like I had the guilt as well of, like, my brother had taken his life. His friend had taken his life a month before my brother took his life.
Yeah.
So I'd always seen my brother's friends' parents take uh, grief. Then I seen my own parents and my siblings' grief. But yet still, I had the guilt of, well, here I am now 2 times trying to take myself out of this plane. So I had the guilt of watching my mother now, watching me, worrying about me.
Yes.
But when you're in that moment, you really do feel you're a burden.
Yes. Yeah.
You
That's one of the
really,
reasons why I
yeah,
was
because you
fearless.
feel that you're the burden. It's not that you don't think anybody's not there for you. It's not that you don't think anybody. No, obviously it's different for everybody, completely different for everybody. But for me, it wasn't that. I knew I had loved people around me. I knew people, but I was just in that depth of despair that I now had to live without my brother for the rest of my life, and not knowing how to cope with that, not knowing how to manage with that, thinking that even though I was getting on with it and suppressing a lot, and that was my biggest issue, that I was a burden now on my parents because I couldn't be happy, and I couldn't be happy to them, and I couldn't be happy for people. I couldn't even be happy for myself. So you do think you're a huge burden on people, and maybe I am better off not here, which is
Absolutely.
again,
Absolutely. I would say that that would be, that was the thing that drove me, especially in a family where there's so much about honor and cultural rightness and, you know, never failing. The whole thing about it's never failing, that was what would be my drivers because I had failed. I had failed at marriage. I had failed at having a relationship with the people I cared for. I had failed at being what people would perceive success in a business. I was successful, but I couldn't see my success because I felt like I was a burden.
yeah,
I can recognize that for the friend who took his life. I can recognize that in the cousin who took his life because all of a sudden, there's people that are stepping in that are trying to help him. And where his despair was, he probably wouldn't have felt that he was actually a bonus to us. He would have thought he was a burden to us. So one of the key things we have to recognize is that if anybody's on the edge of suicide, they're actually thinking they're a burden to the ones they love.
yeah. And this is where, again, stigma comes in, to, where they're not thinking about anybody, maybe some people come in with the selfishness, so selfish. It really isn't. And, I suppose, I don't know, let's say lucky, but I know I have seen it from two aspects. So
Yeah.
I have experienced it from two aspects. So I've experienced it from a part that my first suicide attempt was was not contemplated. I did not think about it. I went back to Dublin. My friend had gone back to was supposed to go back to Finland, but there we go with angels and come back to save me. Her plane was delayed and she came back and she found me. So
Wow.
well, yeah. So divinely, meant to
Yeah.
be here, and so that was, but I remember, like, I had no plan. I had, look, even for the act that I did, no way on my logic mind would I ever. And again, we talked about, you talked about it there, saying, like, if I had the, I don't know what word you use, but like, if I could only do it, if
If
I
I
could
had the
only,
courage to do it, that
courage, that was
way.
the word. Yeah,
Because
courage.
you think that because you think you're failing at life, because you think that you're a burden, you just think you're lazy. Well, that's my experience. I was thinking I was lazy, I was not good enough, I was never strong enough, those kind of things. or it's that, I don't have the strength and the courage. So when I've been through those moments when other people have taken their life, I've just think that they were brave.
Yeah,
They were brave to go through that. Excuse me, but it doesn't, I've never seen it as a selfish act, but I do know that the media and other people
yeah,
talk about it. But of course, they're also grieving. They're grieving through their process. They're grieving through what they're experiencing. And grief can speak all kinds of words
all kinds.
that people don't really mean.
Yeah. And that's where I think as well, when you say about the courage there, like for my first suicide attempt, like if I logically think about it, even now, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have had that courage to do it logically. I definitely wouldn't. But I just remember being in Dublin on my own, very, very lonely, even though I had all of these people around me. All I had to do was make a phone call. And I had one best friend. And I mean, she rang me every hour of every day.
Wow.
Like she was amazing. Her name is Lisa. And she was amazing. Like, and she rang me like all the time, all the time. She was there. So I knew I had her. But I remember crying at a depth that, as I said, I can't even go back there now, even if I tried. I remember listening to Eva Cassidy's songs, but I was just crying with a depth, and it was from a hollow hole. And then I woke up in the hospital. So I didn't contemplate it. I went and I did an act that, I didn't contemplate. I hadn't planned, I hadn't the stuff left, or anything like that. And I just woke up in the hospital not knowing. So, but then my second suicide attempt was planned. I felt that burden. I felt that, that I was just putting all of this stuff on people and that it was going to be better off. And I planned it and I planned that act. And again, I was saved and brought into hospital. So, but I remember after my second suicide attempt, I woke up in the hospital. And again, whether it is divine, it was just like, you're not getting out of here, Sharon. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't going anywhere or that I was never going to do this again.
Wow.
Yeah. I just knew in that moment that this is it, you
Yeah.
know. And when we talk about, when you asked earlier about, how do we come through grief? There is the analogy that like the grief is the tennis ball and your grief and my grief is the same. My grief is 24 years. Your grief is how long is it since your cousin passed?
My cousin passed in September.
September. Okay. So your grief and my grief is the same. It's the tennis ball. The only difference between me and you is that you're in this jar and you don't really have a lot. The tennis ball doesn't really have a lot of
Move.
space to move
Yeah.
around it. And you can hit off it, and that grief will be really raw. It'll be like they say, come in waves, and it can be really, really strong. Whereas because of the work I've done and because of the healing that I've done and the continuous bond that I have with my brother, that he is there. I connect with him every day. I sometimes think I do laugh and tell my clients, I'd say, sometimes he wishes that he was probably back here because I'm like, can you get me car space? Can you make sure now that this happens for me today? So, but I have that continuous bond with my brother. And if you go to Hug, that organization, they are very, very big on that, having that continuous bond and having the light and, allowing that light to come around you. But all that work that I've done, so my grief is still the tennis ball because I miss him. I love him. I
Course.
would love him to be back, but I'm just in a bigger jar. So
Right. Wow.
I can rock, my tennis ball can rock around in that. My grief can rock around it. It still will hit off the sides at certain times
Yeah.
because it's still there. So there's an analogy that says like, oh, people tell people, oh, you know what, look at over time heals pain. The
Yeah.
grief always does the same. The grief is the tennis ball. But
Yes.
you go in, you move into bigger jars or your life expands as you heal, as you get that continuous bond. And as we grow as people, because we have that complicated grief of now I have to live a life. So there's grief of losing my brother and the suicide and all the unknowns of why and the guilt and everything that we talked about. But there's also that part of now it's complicated grief. I have to live my life now without my brother.
Yes.
We have this again. Well, for me, definitely, when I was younger, I used to pray and I used to pray and say, mind my man, mind my dad. So they were the two that I always, in some way, expected to die first.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was a huge shock for me because in my head, I'd planned, okay, if mom and dad pass away now, then all my siblings will all come together and we'll all be safe and we'll all do this and we'll all do that.
Gosh.
huge shock then to me because I had that planned, probably control in my mind that I'd be okay in some
Yeah.
way. But then when my brother passed, there's a complicated grief because now I have to, live a life
You have
without
to
my brother.
adjust. Yeah. You have to readjust the plan that you have of your safety.
Yeah, this is it. And it's so unfamiliar that it was just like, oh my God, this is huge.
Mm.
The weddings, like even my own children. So I have two girls and you know, we always talk about Colin and they would always talk about my daughter did a project in school about him, and suicide, so we're always talking about that continuous bond.
Yeah.
There's always a part that you're like, oh God, he would have been great with them. He would have loved them because before he passed away, we had a little cousin, Sarah, and he loved her. So we got that. And I'm always grateful for those parts because we got to see Colin with Sarah, which was fantastic and how he would have been as an uncle.
Yes.
So I always take that and I say, okay, well, I know he would have been great and he would have
Yes.
loved them and they would have loved him. So, we have to, and it takes that little bit of time. It does take that little bit of time, but I do believe once you have the awareness and like you're putting this out here now and people are going to resonate and they're going to, whether it is a couple of months or whether it is 6 months or whether it is 24 years down along the line, like people are going to say, okay, yeah, you know,
That
it
makes
is
sense to me.
me. Yeah,
Yeah.
send
Uh,
it to me, but it's also okay for me to grieve. And I think that's a huge thing, 'cause especially if you are a yes person or if you are a person who goes, and the next
be on the
minute you're
go.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
like, oh, I'll keep going, I'll keep going. And then another shock or something else small, it might be really, really tiny, might trigger you. And then the next one, we're in this state of depression where we can't move forward. And usually people do it, like I know my parents did it for me and my siblings, they kept going for me and my siblings. But then we moved on because we were having our kids and everything like that. And then this has happened to parents. It's like, oh, when the other siblings move out or the other kids move out, then I grieve then.
Yes, they put themselves on hold. Yeah, I can see that with them, other things and other members in the family that are going on. If I just do that, and I know that mothers tend to do that a lot with the children if they've lost a partner or a father, or, I will just keep going for the rest. And sometimes the fathers do that, I'll keep going. But then
Yeah.
something small comes along and then everything erupts. And
Because we're like a pressure cooker. So if we look at our tummy and all that pressure cooker, so all the pressure just builds and builds and builds and builds. And then until it has to, because there's nowhere else for it to go. And as I say, like we were saying there, it could be the tiniest thing. And then people go, oh my God, that was such an overreaction. But that's
yes,
amygdala saying, hey, I don't take that anymore.
so with the signs of suicide, are there sort of any signs that you can ask people to be aware of, just to be mindful of the people that are around? With depression is one, they're not coping with life. I think this whole thing of an overreaction to small things, that's a huge one. What other
That's
of suicide would you say people need to look out for?
Yeah, so that would have been definitely with my brother, change of behavior,
Mm.
change of demeanor, because he was always a happy-go-lucky, but yet another time he might hit the bin, which was so out of character. So anything that's kind of out of character or like that, again, people pull back. So look, we have a huge thing now with phones. So if people, are going into their phones and they're looking at their phones, and not looking at their phones, but they might, isolate themselves in a room, don't want to talk. But for me, I really believe, and I know it's with Pieta House as well, just ask the question.
Yes.
Any kind of, even if, I remember as well as parents, a lot of the time we have a gut feeling. We just know there's something. And even friends, like as I say, for my friend is fantastic. Like, they just know that there's something,
Yeah.
just to know, Sharon.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't just catch you. So again, and sometimes when I suppose when we ask people, "Are you okay?" or "Is everything okay?" Yeah, 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 it's grand, grand. But there's a different impact when we say, you know, "Are you okay?" And then there's like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm grand." The Irish thing, "I'm grand," sure.
Yes.
You know? But then there's that thing of like, have you thought about suicide?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really important one because just
Or
that soft question. A lot of us are hesitant to open that kettle of worms because how are we going to cope with the answer?
Yeah, and that is it. It's how we're going to cope with the answer. And I believe in that then, is that just knowing where to go. So
Uh-huh.
knowing the organizations, knowing the societies that are set up for this, or again, it could be just, well, let's go to the GP and, let's see where you want to go with this.
Yeah.
Because once you open that, once you open up to that, there's no turning back,
Yes.
because I've said it. And I think in that moment as well, when we're asking it, we're taking away all judgment, we're taking away all criticism, because I remember when my brother passed away, obviously like 24 years ago. Now, it didn't happen so much in our family. It didn't happen in our family, but I know it did happen in another family. Religion was a huge thing. So it was like, there was a big stigma to it that, like, church and all of this stuff. Whereas we've come so far from that now. We've come so far.
A good point that you've said, because I did a little video yesterday that I'm editing, and it really touches on that bit about how religious influences impact how we see suicide.
Mm,
In our religion, being Hindu, there is this thing: if you commit suicide, you've created bad karma for yourself, and you're going to have to drift, in no man's land
mhm.
until you can find your way back to the light. I find that, as a channel and a healer and a psychic, I find that such a misuse of the energy of souls. And for me, I don't see that. I think suicide is a way out. You let that pressure out. That means the light goes, and the light then has to sort of gather itself and do some healing on the other side. But you will do the healing once you're back to source anyway. So for
Yeah.
me, there isn't this, oh, you have to cross a bridge or a journey of darkness before you get to the light. I don't get that. How do you transcend the religious influence around suicide? Because, of course, there's a negative connotation to, if that person's committed suicide, they're going to go to hell type of idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas, I shut it down all the time.
Mm.
I shut it down because like that, doing energy work, and again, working with the light and working with spirit all the time. It's like, I know that's not the truth.
Yes.
You know, I just have that knowing and I have that belief. And, look at it. And I suppose, as I say, we've come so far that we have seen how the conditions, and it's just a condition, and how people have stepped away. And we can see that actually some of the light has been brought to some of the religious stuff. Whereas, Mother Mary and the Sacred Heart, to me, I love the energy of it. I just
Yeah.
love it. I'm hitting it all the time. I have a big picture here. We've been coming like, oh, I'm not religious, Sharon. I'm like, well, that's okay. But and I do believe, and this is, for some people who are listening that are, in the early stages of grief through suicide, or any grief at all, it can be a little bit hard to take. But for me, like, I never had the anger with my brother. Like, I never had anger. I always internalized it as my own, the guilt,
Yeah.
so I was never angry or any of it. Now people have different, stages, but for me, I have that peace now knowing. So there's a peace inside of me just knowing that it was his path.
Mm.
So, and people say, well, how do you know that, Sharon? And he was so young, like he was only 18. And, I'm like, well, I tried to take my life twice
Yeah.
and I'm here.
Yeah.
And that night, he made that decision and he took that action and he passed over, he passed. So for me, it's like, what else could it be?
Yes.
He went there, and I do believe he, some people say, "Oh God, do you think, Sharon, like Colin had to pass for you to get into this job and get into all of that?" And I said, I don't believe that was his path just for me. I believe
Yeah.
that was path for all of us because we've all changed. We've
Yes.
all changed in so many ways, and now we all have this continuous bond that, like, my children, even if they're going in to do a test, they're like, "Oh man, I called Colin in today," so it's about, again, maybe changing that genealogical line, which I definitely am from alcohol because I don't drink alcohol anymore, which again, I would have used as a suppressant to get through all of this.
Yes.
So I believe that, as I say, not for my journey, but it opened up a new journey for me to come out of depression, to come out and change the genealogical line and have an openness for my children. So
Mm.
let's talk about everything really, really openly, and I bring darkness into light to act and rise. So, I bring that walk here to Athenrice, which again is bringing awareness, which is bringing light, which is bringing so much to a town who have lost so many people through suicide. It's not just my brother.
No, no, lost you.
There's so many people who have passed through suicide in our town. So, yeah, so I believe that, it was his path, because if it wasn't, then he'd be here in some way, shape, or form, like I am,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
when I
I
woke up in that
agree.
bed, yeah, after the second suicide attempt, when I woke up in the bed and I says, "You're not getting out of here, Sharon. You better do something."
And
It still took me 10 years. It still took me until the birth of my second, when Eve then had, reflux, and I wasn't coping. I really wasn't coping. But then it wasn't about me anymore. It was
mm,
about him. So then I was led down this path. So Colin had passed 10 years before I got into energy work, before I did a diploma in grief and bereavement. I'm a hypnotherapist now as well. So it was like 10 years before I got into, and another 10 years. So it's actually 20 years of this journey. The man had, like, when you think about it. So it's 20 years on this journey of change.
yeah. I'm thank you for sharing. I think that's a long journey to get to this place, and I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve in many ways. For me, I came into this sort of, over 20 years ago as well. Over 25 years ago was I had my awakening. And I've been going on different paths, even to the point where I was sort of thinking about taking my life at the time. That was around the time that I was waking up. And it was really hard to balance the two. If I'm supposed to be the light, if I'm supposed to be doing the healing for people, why am I feeling so rotten? That was one of the things that used to drive me to sort of complete distraction. It's like, if I can't even sort myself out, how can I help other people? If I get in a way what I want to say to other people out there who are experiencing the suicide or experiencing the grief and feel that their life is in tatters, keep going, because somewhere along the line, you will shift lives. You will make a difference for people. And,
Yeah.
just like you are. And I'm sure that you had quite a deep journey in between all your experience that you had, training in the grief counseling, becoming a hypnotherapist, all of that were paths that led you to here. So everything was actually to be integrated in the process that you work now. So tell me a little bit about how you work, other than working with hugs and working with the darkness into light. What else do you do? What else do you do to help people out there?
So I run retreats. So I run wellness retreats, and I go into companies and run wellness retreats. But my main thing here in my clinic is I do energy work. So I work with chakras, I work with the emotional body. So again, I work very much based on the body keeps the score.
Uh-huh.
So, holding on to the pathological emotions, the anger, the guilt, we've got that trauma, then there's energy blocked in our bodies. So I work on that aspect of energy work, of clearing the energies, of bringing awareness to why we do certain things in a certain way, where we hold them in the body, why we hold them in the body, and then releasing them for them. And then I use hypnotherapy then to create the change. So, so when there's conflict between the logic and the feeling side, the feeling will win all the time. So if I give the example, like I used to weigh 17 stone.
Gosh.
So, so there was a part of me that was like, every Monday, go on the diet, Sharon. Yeah, okay, off you go. You can go on the diet, So every
I know
Monday,
that one.
so it'd say, and then the next minute I'd go on the diet, and 3 days later, Mary would come into work, and Mary bring a cake, and I'd say, I'm on a diet, so I could logically say it, but then this part of the brain would say, I eat the cake, Sharon. You deserve it.
Yes.
You deserve it.
Yeah.
You've done well. So when there's conflict between the logic and the feeling will 110%. So
Yeah.
I will eat the cake,
Yeah.
and then I'll have the guilt. But the guilt isn't just about eating the cake. The guilt will come back because of this 95%. The guilt will come back of, well, look at, again, exactly like you were saying there. Oh, you failed. You failed as a sister. You failed, in your business. You failed at the diet. So the subconscious mind does not know that I just ate the cake, and that's what I'm feeling
Yeah.
guilty of. It brings
Yeah.
up and from the past unless we create that change. And that's where hypnotherapy comes in. Hypnotherapy talks to that part that was holding me back from losing the weight, because there's a part of me that didn't want to be seen. There was a part of me that didn't feel good enough. There was a
And
part
you
of me
were
that,
carrying the weight of your pain, the family's pain and the community pain, the body keeps the score. I totally get that. For me, that body keeps the score is a lot of the shame of the community, a lot of the, we're not going to face that. We're just going to pretend. And as you said, the Indian community is very much about, we'll just keep working. We'll just logically keep working. We'll keep going for the end result. We don't have anything that hits you on the way, you just keep going, so
Yeah.
it's ignoring what you're feeling. So I'm very much in tune with you in that way. I also, like you said, the 95% of the subconscious that comes in and guilts you, that whole thing of retraining that subconscious, as Joe Dispenza would say, nobody else, is that story that you've carried from your
Mhm.
ancestors, the stories that you carried from childhood or whatever difficult experience you've had in your life. You've given it a story, you've given it a meaning, and that's what you've buried it in your cells. And that's the energy work that
Yeah.
we feel we have to do. We have to do the energy, the mind, body, and the spirit work as well. And I love the fact that you've integrated spirit and the spirit of your brother into your everyday life.
Yeah. Every day.
So this is something I'd like to talk about because most of us, and it's also in the 12-step program, the first thing we do is we think about the higher source, the higher being that's there, higher presence that's there. That all 12 steps program will include a belief and ask you to have a relationship with the higher self or a higher being. So tell me, how was that for you? Because you had the religion. Were you deeply invested in the religion to have that relationship with God? Or how was your relationship with the spirit side of life when this was going on for you?
Yeah. So before it was going on, and I remember very much as a child, I remember I had this kind of a little bit of a rhyme. Say I heard my mother pray for this, pray for that, and I used to pray, and it was probably like a little bit of an OCD thing as well. Where I used to bless myself, and then I said, "Oh my God, did I bless myself?" And then I blessed myself 3 times in case I didn't bless myself. But that now I know that that was a whole fear of, if you don't bless yourself, then your prayers aren't going to be answered.
Whoa, wow. Okay.
So
Wow.
I know that now with the knowing that I have, but I remember as a child, I used to be, I'm like blessing myself if I said my prayers. But if I didn't know that I blessed myself, I'd do it again and again. But then, so let's say I had that and I was like, oh, God's going to keep my parents safe. And then when my brother passed away, I did have huge anger with God, Mother Mary, the people who I thought were, going to. Now, we weren't huge mass goers, so we weren't huge mass, but my own kind of innate thing from a child, that I used to do these prayers and I'd say, okay, well, they're going to save me, like, or save my family. So it was never about me, it was always about other people. So I did have this huge disconnect for a long time after it. Now, when I say disconnect as well, you will know as well when our root chakra switches off,
Yeah.
it's a whole kind of different, like our energy
No
field
grounded, there's no rooted. You don't belong. You're adrift.
long, what's it all about?
Yeah.
That's where we go down to that, the shadow into the real kind of darkness. So, and then it was, what actually happened was I used to see my brother in windows. So because I never came home, and I go back to Dublin, because I never came home, I never got to say goodbye to him. So I used to see him in windows. And I mean, he was as clear as we are sitting here on the computer together. And he used to be waving at me.
Wow.
And he used to just wave, but it was a full length of him. And he used to just wave and smile. And then I said, like, oh God, I don't know, do I want to see him? So anyways, I remember one night and I was drinking alcohol. We'd gone out and I remember I seen him so clearly and heard him so clearly. And obviously then the next day I was like, well, maybe that was the drink. But I know now it wasn't. But yeah, so I seen him so clearly and he's like, I'm okay, Sharon. I'm okay. And so that kind of went on for a long time. And then after that night, then I just said, I don't want to see him anymore. I don't want to see him. And I
Wow.
stopped seeing him. And I know that that was him saying, okay,
Yes, your space. Yeah.
I'm going to respect your space until a time, because then he came back tenfold, until a time that like you're ready for it. So,
Yes.
and that was a long time, that was a long time until then I went to this lady and I had hurt my back and I was sent to this lady and Chris, who is, I do say always, I mentioned her the other day, Chris Kilkelly, who saved my life. She changed
Wow.
my life. 10 years ago, because we only came up as a 10-year friends there on Facebook. So she definitely changed my life. I went for a massage. She opened my root chakra. And in that moment, everything changed.
Oh,
So I got that sense of belonging. And when you talk about higher power, I just knew there was something bigger than me, and not just Colin. because I knew he was here as an energy, but I just felt, I could feel there was just something bigger than me supporting me, guiding me, and all the intuition started coming, all this guidance. So this lady, Chris, had said so she worked with me on the Thursday, and then I could not think negative. Like, so I rang her on Saturday and I said, I don't know what you've done to me, but I actually couldn't even have an argument, even if I wanted to. I was trying to, but I couldn't. So she said, oh, I think you better come down to me. She says, I need to tell you something. So she told me then that my root chakra was blocked. She would have known my brother, since Colin. And, that she said, you really should get into energy work. She says, because you're going to help a lot of people. And I
Right.
was like, all right, okay. So she mentioned Reiki, and I was like, all right, okay, see you later. So I went home and Googled Reiki. I don't think so, and then you have all this negativity that's stuck to religion and so I was like, not into that. So, but then on the Monday, so that was Saturday, and then on the Monday, I went to work, and this lady was in, and she was always so busy. She was always just a busy, busy lady. And then the next minute, anyways, I said, oh my God, are you back? Like, she'd taken some time out. She goes, no, no. She says, I'm finished. I'm only back in for a cup of tea. And I said, oh, yeah. And I said, what are you doing now? She says, oh, I'm a Reiki master. What? She said, yeah, I'm a Reiki master. And I said, oh, you won't believe it. I said, somebody actually told me on Saturday I should do it. She said, I am doing a course on the following Saturday. Come to it. Come to it. And that was it.
Synchronicity, perfect timing. Isn't that lovely?
It was
Been in
so
really
lovely.
with that. Yeah. I mean, I trained in Reiki in 95, 96, and I was very much into the scientific and the logic, and I'm not doing any of that, because again, with you, the religious thing, there was a lot of dogma, a lot of control, especially over women and stuff. And I grew up in a very difficult home. And my father was very religious, and because it was him that was difficult, I would not connect with religion. Why do I want religion? Because religion
Yeah.
for me is the control that dad is putting over us. I don't want that. So although there was so much of it that I enjoyed and loved, and I've sort of slowly got back to it, there's the truth of it for the religion that I love,
Mm.
chakra system, that's our belief systems. The energy flow, you've got it Reiki, we've got it as prana. A lot of the ancient wisdom is there. It's just how people interpret it and how they apply it. So when my father was applying his knowledge of religion and culture and controlling it, he was actually filtering his knowledge, which was actually very powerful, through his fears. And what we got was his fears. So we felt controlled by his fears. So that's something that's really important to mention to people. If you find that religion has a conflict with fear, then notice that the fears might not be yours, they might be somebody else's, and see if you can clear up the spiritual connection from the truth of it for you. So as I sort of started being challenged to change from being very, I wouldn't say I was atheist, I would say it was more agnostic. And I was like, oh, I don't like that, too practical, too logical, didn't want to do it. Then my body and my life started falling apart. And at that point, it was almost like I couldn't get anything. This is the time that did want to take about my life. And my sister had a similar experience to you with the child and that kind of thing. Her child came along with issues with the health. She looked everywhere and then found a lady who did Reiki. And the first time in 2 years, her and my niece slept, through Reiki.
Yeah.
She then kept saying, you got to go, you got to go. And she forced me to go. And it's sort of the trajectory, as you know, the things happen and then they open up and you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? So it's very much, you mentioned earlier about the emptiness that you feel from me doing the work that I do energetically and spiritually. The emptiness for me is that connection to the reach, which is where we belong. It's filling that space.
Fill in that space. Yeah. So there's a void.
Mm.
And again, for me, energy work, the connection, calling in angels, my brother, as I say, I have them every day. I'm up at 5 every morning, bringing in energy for my clients and bringing in energy and healing. And it's so powerful. It's so powerful because, and I do say to people like, text me if you need a bit of energy, but like I might be in the gym at 7 o'clock and then somebody will text me, but I already have the energy sent at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I send out energy to anybody who's thinking about me, and I have, obviously my client list and stuff like that. And I said, send out to anybody who needs me. And I sent like 300,000 angels out to them and all of this energy, that energy that goes out. So I might be in the gym at 7 o'clock and somebody might text me and I will get it. And then, maybe 20, 30 minutes later, thanks a million for the energy, Sharon. Thanks a million. They've already done the
That
same.
that Reiki, because and all energy work, because I've done quite a few of energy systems. That whole thing of we're thinking that we can time everything, and actually when spirit surprises us, and you're like, "How did that happen?" I'm exactly like you. I'll be, yeah, somebody's thinking about me. I'll have that switch on and go, "Yeah, they need this," and then about an hour later, "Oh, by the way," and I've got a really good friend who was a client before who lives in Greece, and he does the same thing. "By the way, I've just had a download, and it's to do with you." I'm like, "Yeah, I know you have because I just sent that to you."
Yeah. And it's amazing. And I think some people sometimes, I'm actually working with him now. We actually just launched it today, but there's a guy that I work with, Trevor, and he's a hypnotherapist. But I had a download for him, and I like voice noted him. I was like, "Oh my God, I just had a thought for you. You should do this. You should do that." And then the next minute, while I'm in it, the download coming in, it's like, "No, you should do it with him, Sharon." So I'm like, "Actually, Trevor, we're doing it together."
How brilliant. I love it the way that it works. You know, we think, and a lot of the time I used to find I'm serving others, but half the time the message was for me as well. So exactly like you said, it's not just you, it's actually, I've got to be there. I've got to be doing this and
Yeah, yeah.
make it lead to
Because
life.
the energy will go fantastic. And there's a belief and expectation. And when we talk about, when people come in and they see the lovely picture I have of Mother Mary, and they instantly go, and that's okay, because obviously that's what we
They're
mean,
connected.
But then it's funny because sometimes people will come and they'll come back like a couple of times, and then they'll say, "Oh my God, it's a picture." I'm like, "No, that picture's always been there." Only at the right time when they need to see it.
It's
So
amazing, isn't it? It's
amazing, right?
its mind. Yeah.
That's it. They won't see that picture, and then another day they'll come in and say, "Oh my gosh, is that a new picture?" I'm like, "No, that picture's been there for 5 years."
I love that. I could talk to you for hours, but I don't want
I
to.
know, I know. I'm the
Loving,
same.
loving, loving talking to you. So thank you for sharing your story. What is next for you? You're doing this work with this friend who's the hypnotherapist. Are there any campaigns? I know you're bringing From Darkness to Light Walk to Athenry. I know you're working with Theta. I know you work with Hugs and you've got your own practice. But what else is next for you that you would like to bring to attention for people?
Yeah. So I suppose, like, for me, I do a lot of things on the side of it, like, but for me, it's definitely bringing that awareness, you know, that even when we do energy work, even when we do, meditation, that it's about the process. Like, we have to continue the process. So going to energy work once, it's great. It will, like, I mean, it will change your life,
Yes.
but we do have to do the work then in the background. Like, we really do have to do the work in the background. So that's for me, as I say, even though I'm working with corporates and wellness and stuff like that, for me, my drive is I'm going to start hopefully now in the summer. I'm going to train with Mental First Aid Ireland to facilitate that program, but also work with schools. So at the minute, I am putting together. I already have one for adults. It's a 6 weeks that you can use as a 12-week program, where there's energy work in it, where there's hypnotherapy work in it, and it's all online. So you can do it. Usually, I would give it to my clients when we're in between the 8-week process. But I'm also going to create one of those for teenagers. So I'm going to create that awareness, and my whole thing is to hopefully get it to, because for people to come to me. So we've got three main big schools. We call them, secondary schools here in Athenry. And on an average of a week, I would see about five of those people.
Wow.
So, it's huge. Self-harm is lack of confidence is huge. Of course, we've got the phones and everything like that, that people are isolating themselves, so we've got a lot of stuff going on. But to see me, you'll probably need at least 3 sessions. So I do kind of every second week or maybe a month to try and push it out to people, obviously, to be able to be affordable. So my whole passion is, and where I'm going, is to try and get funding to get this program into schools, where they can either the schools buy it as a fund rate, or it's a low, because
Investment, yeah, cost. Yeah.
yeah. And as well, like, I mean, if I'm in I went to see Bruce Lipton there.
Mm, but
Tim,
very exciting.
yeah, oh God, it was just brilliant, but if I'm in that energy for 8 weeks, if I'm in that energy and just listening to something over and over, because there's only two ways we can change. One is emotional impact. The other way is constant spaced repetition. What am I listening to? What am I doing every day that's going to constitute change? So if I do this for 8 weeks, and if I'm on this vibration, And anyway, and it doesn't matter what my environment is, because remember, environment is huge as well. Like,
Yes.
I might have that support
Yeah.
at home, but if I have that support from an online program and someone that I can reach out to, then I'm going to shift here. And then I shift. And then I keep going and I keep growing. So that is my main passion. It is mental health. It is prevention of suicide, because sometimes, my brother had gone too far, had been to the point of being too far. And we see that a lot. And yes, we can help them on a certain level, but that's more of the Piet House and stuff like that have the services for psychiatric and all of these things. But we can, like, suicide can be prevented.
Yes.
Healing can happen. And that is where my passion is to, wherever anybody is on it is spectrum, when it's working with the grief of it, but wherever anybody is, then, change can happen. And there are stuff out there outside of the counseling, outside of the psychotherapy, outside of the lists, outside the waiting list, and there is
Support you
stuff.
through your dark night. Yeah, absolutely. I
And
think
there's
we will, sorry to interrupt, we will put your details for link and that on the podcast. One thing that I've just realized as you're talking about the schools and that is about a week ago, I suddenly had a download about going into schools. I started years ago, 12 years ago, with a friend doing a little bit of coaching in schools, but I've not kept that up here. And the download came, said, you've got to reach out to these teens. Exactly what you're saying about what you're being fed through the phones and how depression and suicide rates are going up. So we've got some talking to do. And I will be excited because that was my first thing was, how do I make it affordable for the schools and how do I get it into schools in the UK and in Spain here to say to the kids, guys, come on, we've got to do some work here. 'Cause that's the thing. But thank you so much, Sharon, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will probably have to have you back on again, but I love the fact that we've started with you. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you so much for everyone. And just for everybody out there as well, like, healing can happen. And just reconnecting with self, I think, is huge.
Yes, I agree with you totally. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Sharon.
so much.
Have a great weekend, what's left of it, and speak soon. Bye, love.
Bye.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Divine Relationship Podcast with me, Reshmi Purmar. I'm so grateful that you joined me, and I do hope that you got something beautiful out of that sharing. If there are any comments that you would like to make, if there's any feedback, then please do comment below. Do follow if you enjoyed what I had to share and want to find out more or know when the next episode is published. If you feel that you enjoyed it and you got something out of it, please do share it with somebody that you feel would enjoy listening to and receive some benefit of listening to these podcasts. I'm deeply grateful for you once again for joining me, and I wish you a magical, magical day with lots of love. Namaste.